Hi, and welcome to Simplifying Sustainability. I'm Donal, founder and CEO of ENSO.
And I'm Erin, a sustainability expert here at ENSO.
Great. Today we are tackling Scope 1 and 2 emissions. And this is something which really every SME should care about because they are key information requests and business opportunities, as well as reducing our impact on the planet.
We're going to be breaking it down into bite-sized actionable tips. I know when we hear emissions, it sounds like a huge puzzle piece. We're actually going to be doing 3 separate episodes about emissions coming up, including this one. So we're going to get into as much information as possible. And as always, we're going to keep things practical and relevant to you as businesses.
Yeah, great. So look, by the end of this episode, you'll understand what are Scope 1 and 2 emissions, and then how to calculate them. And finally, what are the practical tips to help you get started? What are those easy wins to really help you get momentum going? Okay, so let's get started, Erin. Whether we're talking to businesses or working with them directly, emissions comes up all of the time. And whether people are getting started in that journey or they're already on the way through it, let's just start off with why is it important for businesses to really think about this and start looking at emissions?
Yeah, absolutely. So the climate scientist in me is very excited to answer this question in terms of our responsibility with dealing with the climate crisis. As businesses, we do have power to take action to reduce our emissions now, which is more critical than ever. So really quick climate change crash course. Emissions that we as humans and we as businesses are letting off are causing temperatures to get higher. And that is essentially what is causing the climate to change. That was very much the Spark Notes, very quick explanation. But that's essentially what it is. More emissions, higher temperatures, worse effects of climate change, things like sea level rise, high intensity rainfall, natural disasters, heat waves. All of these things that we've seen an uptick of in the past, I would say even couple of decades, that's just going to continue to get worse the more we emit. And as businesses, we need to understand these impacts, figure out how we're going to adapt to them because they're already around us, but we want to mitigate them from becoming as bad as they could become. So any emissions reductions we do now will make our future climate change not as bad. And reducing and becoming less dependent on carbon intensive processes and emissions intensive processes will make you more resilient as a business overall. So just to kind of quickly sum that up, we need to reduce emissions to stop the worst impacts of climate change, to continue to be resilient as businesses and ensure that we can continue to do business in the years to come, which is definitely the goal. And many SMEs that we talk to about emissions, they get a little bit overwhelmed, fairly so, when you hear, let's start talking about our emissions, let's measure them, let's talk about reducing them, because it's very hard to know where to start and what to focus on first. Donal, I'm curious if you have any suggestions on where our listeners could get started.
Yeah, well, you're very right. That is one of the first questions that comes up all the time. And look, there's a reason why we're talking about Scope 1 and 2, especially a lot of the businesses we're working with, they're in that SME category. So firstly, if they're being asked for data from some of their bigger customers or within their supply chain, if they're looking at tenders and they're actually responding to some of these questions, a lot of the time, this is only looking for Scope 1 and Scope 2. And the reason for this is because, they know that looking at Scope 3 is a huge undertaking. And like you said, we'll talk about this in our next episode. But Scope 1 and 2 is a lot easier to manage, a lot easier to measure, and it's a perfect place to start, both from an impact and a reporting point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. And actually, this is a great transition for me to jump into explaining what we mean when we say Scope 1, 2, and 3.
I think so, yeah.
I think that's a great place for us to start. We've got this framing of why from an environmental standpoint, and then why from a business standpoint. You're going to need this information. So, very quick breakdown of what we mean when we say Scope 1, 2, and Scope 3. So, when we talk about emissions as a business, there are so many parts of our business that have related emissions. We needed to break it down into a couple different categories. we needed to talk about our direct emissions, scope 1. So scope 1 is any emissions that you have directly on site. So let's say you are a manufacturer and you use natural gas on site to power generators or other equipment, and that releases direct emissions. That would be your scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 are indirect emissions, specifically from energy use. So for most businesses we work with, this is pretty much just your electricity use, and it can be calculated based on how much electricity you used and what source it came from. But this might also be purchased heat or purchased cooling or even purchased kind of natural gas products that aren't burned on site. So scope 1 and 2 for us are kind of the inner circle of your emissions. They're the ones that are the most in your control, easiest to track and measure, which is why we start there. Scope 3, which I'll break down in much more depth in our next episode. Scope 3 is your entire value chain. These are indirect emissions from your upstream and downstream value chain. So this includes like transportation, waste, end of life of a physical product if you have one, employee commuting, things like this. So it's a bit broader, and for many companies it actually makes up a significant portion of your overall emissions, but it's much less out of your control. Sorry, it's much less in your control, and it makes it more difficult to understand and take action on. The reason we're doing scope 1 and 2, beyond it being easier to measure, is that your bigger partners who are trying to understand their scope 3 will need your scope 1 and 2 emissions to make up that data. So any information requests will likely, at this point in time, only ask you for scope 1 and 2. So now that we understand scope 1 and 2 and the scopes overall, hopefully, narrowing in just on scope 1 and 2, Donal, are you hearing of any specific challenges or issues that business owners are having with this and with maybe calculating and understanding those scope 1 and 2 emissions?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we're working with businesses, like I said, this comes up all the time. Two of the biggest challenges: one, measurement. How do we actually do this? And then two is getting buy-in to actually start taking action. So I think businesses, a lot of time, they have a bit of a step back when you hear about it because they think it's going to cost them money. They think it's going to take up a lot of time. Do we have the resources to do this? So it's that internal buy-in to actually get action and be taken. And actually, when you look at both of them, they're quite resolvable in each case. So firstly, when we look at measuring, businesses are just unsure how to do this. They don't have a system in place. Some of the businesses that are on their journey that we started working with have an Excel spreadsheet that we've seen. They have different methods of doing this. For us, using the platform and everything, it's really simple, just to pull it all together and really just have a system in place. And that takes away a lot of the overwhelm and headache. So I think that's a really big and an important step, and really takes away a lot of the friction for businesses. And look, a lot of the time it can be just due to a lack of knowledge, a lack of time, or personnel. So like we've talked about before, when businesses are starting this journey, most times there's nobody responsible for taking action or for actually, running all of this. So having that person in place, we help do that and help work with that person and get that measurement structure in place. And then when it talks to actually breaking down the barriers, getting that internal buy-in, we firstly show how easy it can be, show, how frictionless it can be, and then just show the benefits. First, on two sides. One, you can save energy, you can save money, you can make your processes more streamlined and start reducing those energy bills. So that immediately starts getting interest from decision makers. And then the other side of the coin, where you're looking at this, can feed directly into reporting, make you a better supplier, and help you hopefully win some new business.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to dive even a little bit more into those two challenges, particularly in terms of actual calculation of scope 1 and 2 emissions. Even for me, I've taken a lot of time looking at carbon accounting. I created the carbon calculator on our own platform, looked at a lot of different carbon calculators. It's difficult, and we're all still learning a lot about carbon accounting. So there's changes that happen in that methodology all the time. I would highly recommend just getting started. Pull the information you do have, pull your energy bills, start there. You can always update emissions factors, which are these multipliers that we can use to understand how the amount of, say, natural gas you use, how that translates to emissions. And those can be changed, but getting your processes in place and understanding the general way that it works is really key. And particularly with scope 1 and 2, it's simple enough. All it is how much did you use of this resource times that emissions factor I just mentioned, and that's it. As long as you are in the right units, which is always a fun thing to check. But yeah, that's really as simple as it is with scope 1 and 2, because you're getting that information directly from your operations. So yeah, absolutely.
And you're really right. And I think that's another, I suppose, barrier or challenge when people come to this. There's such a huge volume of information and different methods and different ways of doing it. That can be hugely overwhelming and actually just put people off and stop them taking that action. There are a couple of, relatively simple but like pretty effective online calculators. The Irish government have the Climate Action Toolkit, which is, a nice way to sort of get moving, start seeing if you're using X amount of energy, which you can easily get from your bills, what is the emission factor? It does all the calculations for you. So
completely,
that's quite important. We're a member of the SME Climate Hub as well. They've got their own online tools, so definitely worth checking out.
Yeah.
Of course, our own platform as well. We help you look at your energy and waste and water and everything else aligned with the greenhouse gas protocol emission factors.
Yeah, exactly. And actually do have to give a quick shout out to SME Climate Hub. They recently updated their carbon emissions, and you pick a calculator based on your business size. So it gives you more accurate calculations. I went through it a couple days ago just for us at ENSO, and I think it actually gave us a much more accurate number. So that was really exciting to see. I will definitely be diving into that methodology for our own calculator and to learn a bit from what they did. And that hits on a really important point with emissions. We're all learning from each other. This is something that there are experts in, and we want to make sure we take advantage of that really good information. But even those experts are learning and evolving in this space. So we will be here with you to learn and evolve and figure this all out. But it's really all about having the information to start that conversation and having this information, or even a plan to gather it, to start gathering it, that is well thought out and easy to understand, easily doable, whether it's just gathering the information for one of those calculators or for the ENSO platform, whatever it might be. This is a key tool in getting that overall internal buy-in. If you come in with this, look how easy it is, this is what we need to do, I need just X amount of time and to talk to these departments, and we'll have a baseline, it's going to make your life way easier with that internal buy-in. Donal, I don't know if you had any other thoughts to dive deeper in on that internal buy-in specifically, and that would be definitely interesting.
Yeah, and look, what we've seen really work, and it's the simple things sometimes when a business or when we're working with someone, they can go in with, a printout of a graph and a couple of graphs to show, like you said, the baseline, this is what we did in 2024. Now in 2025, we're actually already on track to reduce that by X%. Mm-hmm. And it's that visualization. People just they don't want to be bombarded with tons and tons of information. You don't want giving your management team or whoever you're working with, a 20-page report. You want to be able to succinctly and clearly show that what you're doing is simple, it's time efficient, and it's having an impact. So it's really, really important. And I think, from our point of view, it's being clear and, not overwhelming the people that you're communicating with as well. So that's a really nice way of doing it. Again, working with us, we help businesses do that, to visualize what you're doing and show the impact. We were talking to a business recently around, they put solar panels on the roof, and now they've quite a big installation, and they're really seeing the effects of that. But the effects, they're reducing by over 25%, in sunny days. This is amazing. And to be able to show that then, and even for outside of your business, to show that to your stakeholders, your customers, it's cool, and it's really easy to do as well. So by starting at the beginning, that measurement part, getting a grip on it, and it really is an easy win, and it can be, a lot of the time, it's that first step on your sustainability journey, just gathering the data that's already there in your bills, and then being able to communicate your usage. And then, and we help businesses all the time do this, have a sort of an actionable plan to show, this is the steps we're going to take to try and reduce this over time. I think probably sometimes we deal with this a lot. Businesses are kind of afraid to take that first step because then that means they might have to do something, and in their mind that might be something drastic that's going to cost a lot of money and going to take up a lot of their time. But it really doesn't. Just making that first step, getting that graph together and getting the data, and then really start simple steps to start reducing that over time. It doesn't all have to be done at once.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. Even just an action plan to get the data is great. Because
really
sometimes it does take some chatting with coworkers and finagling to get all that information together. And we understand that that can be tricky too. But it's a nice feeling once you get it and then take steps towards reduction.
It is. It honestly is. And then that's something you have that you're always coming back to. So it's great.
Totally.
And Erin, one of the top questions we get all the time is what time period emissions should be measured? How do you actually go about this? And are you doing it monthly, quarterly, yearly? How does it work?
Yeah, this is a great question. A little bit of it relies on data availability, but at the very minimum, you want to be able to have a baseline year, like a full year. So we're in 2025 now. Ideally, if you can go back and gather, say, your energy bills or any other information from 2024 to get even a simple baseline, that would be great. If not, if you don't have those things, great. We're starting our baseline year right now. We're going to put in the bill we get this month, and then our baseline year is going to be June 2025 to June 2026. That's our baseline year. That's fine as well. But you do want 12 months of data just due to seasonal variations in business activities, temperatures, all that fun stuff. You ideally want to be tracking it at least once a month because of those variations. It does give us a nice understanding of how usage changes over time, and then it's easier to see reductions when you do put in place any actions in the future. Yeah. If it's possible to get data more often than this, say if you have a smart meter for your energy or your natural gas usage or your water or whatever it might be, and you can get a reading every day, amazing. That would be phenomenal to have that level of data and that level of information. But that's genuinely not possible for everyone. And I know sometimes companies give you bills every 6 weeks instead of every month. That's fine as well. I would say the goal is every month. But we know that it's not always possible. But the shortest time frames you can get, the more data we can have, the better. The more you understand, the better. I'm not the first person to say this, and I certainly won't be the last, but you can't act on what you're not measuring. We can't move forward with what we don't understand. So the more information you have, the better.
Yeah, and that's a really good point as well, because if you're doing it monthly, it actually gives you a structure where this is now part of your monthly routine. And it's actually getting this, because sometimes with a new habit, you started with a lot of gusto and a lot of, a lot of great ideas, but a lot of energy. Then if it's not actually fixed into your routine, all of a sudden after a month or two, it can fall off. So actually having that monthly check-in to start collating that data, it's really good and just gets that system in place with the business.
Yeah, completely agree. I actually love that. I think it could even just tie right into when you pay the bill, you pop in the number into the ENSO platform or whatever tracker you're using at the moment. It's that simple.
Yeah, create that routine. Brilliant. Erin, can you give us your top tips for getting started with Scope 1 and Scope 2?
Yes, let's get nice and practical. My first step for any emissions tracking or even tracking of a specific resource would be an organizational map. Map your organization and your use of energy, your use of any fuels on site, purchase energy, anything like that, anything that goes into that Scope 1 and 2 definition. For me, I'm very visual. I would literally draw it out, maybe like with some lines and circles of the processes. If you prefer a list, whatever works. Map out all of the energy use and all of the emissions creating processes in your business. So for us at ENSO, we're looking at Scope 1 and 2 being very small because we don't really have a physical space, but it would really be things like energy use would probably be our biggest part of our Scope 1 and 2 emissions. So that would be what our map would look like. Our Scope 3 would be much more interesting, which we'll talk a little bit about in the next episode, which is going to be true for most people, actually. But so yeah, once you have this map, what's great about it is it will be useful for all of your sustainability needs. So this is not a use it once and leave it. This is a map you'll have and you'll be able to update and use on your sustainability journey. Once you have that, document your methods. Be clear about how you're calculating your emissions. You're going to have a number and people are going to ask you how you got to it. If you're on the ENSO platform, we have a document with that methodology, so you don't have to do that yourself. Other carbon calculators will be the same. They'll have their methodology, or they'll say it's in line with something like the greenhouse gas protocol. So that will be, easy enough as well. But you just definitely want to be keeping up to date with that. And then finally, speaking of keeping up to date, make sure you're continually monitoring and keeping everything, up to date and ready to go when you're asked for it. It's much better to input, as Donal said, one piece of information a month in your monthly routine than having to go back, dig through it at the end of the year for some kind of report.
Great advice, Erin. Thank you very much. I think that is a really good way for people just to get started and get the ball rolling. And this really is not a difficult process once you get moving. So thank you for that.
No, and it's actually really interesting. I think you'll learn a lot more about your business beyond just the emissions side. You'll learn to be more efficient overall, which saves money, time, and work hours for people as well, making everyone's lives easier. So there's a lot to be gained from looking into your scope 1 and 2 emissions and your own processes.
Yeah, especially I really like that idea of mapping your organization, because a lot of the time people are just in their own silos, or they're just looking at it, not as a as at the full scope of what their organization is. So you can, outside of sustainability, you'll even find that will benefit, and you'll actually
absolutely
figure out other problems.
Yeah, seriously, it's really, really useful. We've done it with many businesses for many purposes, and it always comes back around.
So as a final thought from this episode of looking at scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, for me, really, it's understanding and working to reduce your scope 1 and 2 emissions. It's not just good for the planet, it's good for your business too.
You have the most control over these scope 1 and 2 emissions, meaning they're the easiest to measure and the easiest to take action on.
If you'd like to learn more about scope 1 and 2 emissions and how you can actually start measuring it and taking action, visit the ENSO website. We've got lots of tools, resources and guides. And also feel free to reach out to us on our website. We'll happily set up a call and chat through how we can help your business start making a positive impact.
Yeah, absolutely. We obviously love talking about this. And just make sure you don't forget to follow us for updates and tips. We're here to help every step of the way. Next time on Simplifying Sustainability, we're going to be talking more specifically about scope 3. So this is all of your upstream and downstream emissions. So we'll really be getting into what that means, what you need to look at, and how to measure that aspect of your emissions. And then in the following episode, we'll get into actions for reducing your overall emissions. So these first 2 episodes are making sure we understand what scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are, how we can measure them, and then we'll get into the exciting part, that emissions reduction moving forward. Thank you so much for listening today, and we hope this was helpful on your emissions journey.